A black woman steps into the bustling airport feeling the familiar rush of excitement as she imagines the warm sun and the peaceful beach awaiting her at her destination. She's been planning this trip for months, and today is the day it's finally happening. Her heart races with anticipation as she glances at her watch, realizing she's got plenty of time before her flight boards. She grabs her phone to double-check her flight details one last time, scrolling through the email that confirmed everything: the dates, the flight number, the terminal, and gate, all set in stone. She smiles as she tucks the phone back into her purse, taking a deep breath and walking toward the check-in counter. The airport is lively as always, people rushing past her, dragging their suitcases, chatting on their phones, and catching up with family members. But none of it phases her today. She's in a bubble of her own excitement, the weight of the world lifted off her shoulders as she imagines herself on the sandy beach, sipping a cool drink in the sun. She makes her way through the crowd, navigating the maze of people and signs to reach the check-in counter, where a friendly-looking attendant greets her with a smile. The attendant takes her ticket and passport, glancing down at them quickly, then back at the woman's face. The woman smiles back politely, feeling the warmth of the moment as the attendant starts typing something into the system. A few seconds pass, and then the attendant's expression changes just slightly, enough for the woman to notice. She can feel the shift in energy, but can't quite place it. The attendant's fingers hesitate over the keyboard before continuing to type. A few moments later, the attendant looks up at her with a more serious expression and says, "Excuse me, ma'am, could you please step over here for a moment?" The woman's heart skips a beat as she wonders what's going on. Everything seemed fine a moment ago. She nods and follows the attendant to a nearby desk, where another officer is standing. Now she feels the first stirrings of nervousness in her stomach. Something about this feels wrong. The officer takes her ticket and examines it closely. His brow furrows as he looks at her with an expression that almost seems accusing. Then he presses a button on his radio and speaks in a low voice. The woman tries to remain calm, but her mind starts racing. What's happening? Why is everyone suddenly acting so tense? The officer turns to her and says, "We have a problem with your ticket. It appears to be fake." She's taken aback by the accusation, and for a brief moment she wonders if he's joking. Is this some kind of mistake? She shakes her head. "No, it can't be fake. That's impossible," she tells him. But the officer doesn't seem convinced. He asks her to step aside, and without saying much more, he starts typing into a computer at the desk. The woman stands frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. She watches as a few more officers approach the scene, exchanging glances with one another, none of them speaking directly to her. She can't help but feel the weight of their gaze on her, and that familiar sense of dread begins to creep into her chest. The officer at the desk picks up his phone and dials a number. It's not long before a supervisor arrives and immediately starts reviewing the ticket, while the woman stands there unable to understand what's happening. Why would her ticket be fake? It looks completely legitimate to her. She tries to stay composed, but the knot in her stomach tightens as the supervisor begins asking her questions about how she purchased the ticket and where she got it from. She answers truthfully, but it doesn't seem to make any difference. The suspicion in their eyes doesn't fade. Instead, it intensifies. She's being treated like a criminal, and she has no idea why. At this point, the other passengers walking by start noticing the scene unfolding, and the whispers begin. They look at her with curious eyes, and she starts to feel the sting of their judgment, as if they're all wondering what she's done wrong. She tries to stay strong, but with every passing second, the feeling of being singled out grows stronger. The officers around her continue to talk among themselves in hushed tones, as if she's not even there, and she feels smaller and smaller with every word they exchange. The tension in the air grows thicker with every passing moment. The woman feels as though she's trapped in a whirlwind of confusion and anxiety. The officer at the desk stands up and motions for her to follow him. Without saying a word, she's led through a narrow hallway away from the main area, where the check-in counter is located. She tries to take slow, deep breaths, but it's hard to keep calm when she has no idea what's going on. She glances around, hoping for some kind of explanation, but the few people she sees don't seem to notice her at all. They are wrapped up in their own worlds. The hallway feels claustrophobic, and every step echoes, as if it's amplifying her fear. She can hear the faint sounds of the airport buzzing in the distance, but it feels as though she's been transported to another world altogether, one where she's being treated like an outcast. As they approach a small room near the back of the airport, the officer opens the door and gestures for her to go inside. She hesitates for a moment before stepping in. The room is dimly lit with a single chair in the middle and a metal table that looks like it belongs in a police interrogation room. She takes a seat on the chair, feeling as though her legs might give out beneath her. Her hands instinctively grip the sides of the seat, her palms slick with sweat. The door closes behind her with a soft thud, and the officer stands outside, leaving her alone in the cold silence of the room. She can't help but wonder if she's somehow being punished for something she hasn't done, and the thought makes her stomach churn. She had just been excited about her trip moments ago. Now it feels like she's in the middle of a nightmare. Her mind races as she tries to piece together any reason why this could be happening. Was it a simple mistake, a mix-up in the system, or something worse? She can't make sense of it. She checks her phone to distract herself, but there are no new notifications. The messages from her family members wishing her a safe flight seem distant now, as though they belong to someone else. She tries to calm her nerves, but the weight of the situation presses down on her like an invisible hand, squeezing tighter with every second that passes. As she sits there in the sterile room, with the faint hum of lights overhead, the minutes seem to stretch on endlessly. The anxiety of being alone with her thoughts starts to take over her mind, spinning with possibilities of what could be happening outside. She wonders if her family is waiting at the gate for her to board, or if they are already wondering why she hasn't arrived. Yet the reality of the situation begins to hit her. She might miss her flight. She might miss the vacation she had been looking forward to for so long. She stands up and paces back and forth in the small room, trying to shake off the feeling of dread. But it's impossible. The more she moves, the more the silence around her seems to close in on her. She glances at the door, expecting someone to come in and explain what's going on. But no one does. The minutes drag on, becoming an hour, and still no one comes to speak with her. She begins to wonder if anyone remembers she's even here, if anyone cares to listen to her side of the story. Then suddenly, the door opens and the officer who had escorted her in walks in, followed by two other people, a man in a suit and a woman wearing the security uniform. The man looks at her with a raised eyebrow, as though he's inspecting her like she's some kind of specimen on display. She feels her anxiety spike, but she forces herself to hold steady. She won't let them see how scared she is. She has to stay strong for whatever comes next. The man speaks first, his voice cold and clipped. "We've reviewed your ticket, and there seems to be a problem," he says, his eyes never leaving hers. The woman stands next to him with a look of indifference as she crosses her arms over her chest. They don't seem to care that she's upset or confused. The situation feels increasingly unreal, as if she's been thrust into some kind of twisted game where the rules are unclear and the stakes are far too high. The woman feels her heart race as the man's words hang in the air, like a heavy cloud of uncertainty. She wants to speak, but the words get caught in her throat. She clears her throat and tries again. "I don't understand," she says, her voice shaking slightly. "I've already shown you my ticket. It's real. Why are you treating me like this?" But the man doesn't seem moved by her distress. He simply looks at her with a cold stare and repeats, "We've reviewed your ticket, and there's an issue with it." She looks at the woman beside him, hoping for some kind of compassion, but the woman's face is unreadable. Her arms still cross tightly over her chest, as if she's been trained to be stone cold to everything around her. The woman feels a knot tighten in her stomach. What could be the issue with her ticket? It's perfectly legitimate. Everything about it is right. She paid for it in full. The confirmation was sent to her email, and the barcode scanned without issue at the check-in counter. Why are they treating her like a criminal? A surge of panic rises in her chest, and she stands up abruptly, her hands trembling as she presses them to the metal table. "I need to speak to someone higher up," she says, her voice now more forceful than before. "I'm not going to sit here and let you accuse me of something I didn't do." She takes a step forward, but the woman in the security uniform steps closer to her, blocking her path. With a firm look, "You need to calm down," she says, her voice low but firm. "You're making this worse." The woman feels a wave of frustration wash over her. Why won't anyone listen to her? She has been calm the entire time, And all she's asking for is a chance to explain herself. Why are they treating her like this? They haven't even offered a solution, just accusations. And cold stares. The man in the suit doesn't say anything, he just watches her, with that same detached expression, as if he's already made up his mind that she's guilty of something she doesn't even know. She takes a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. She knows she has to stay calm, but it's hard when every instinct in her tells her that something is wrong. This shouldn't be happening. She hasn't done anything wrong. Why is she the one being detained, while everyone else around her seems to move along with their day? She should be at the gate by now, getting ready to board the plane. Instead, she's stuck in this small, dimly lit room with no clear answers. The silence stretches on as she stares at the floor, trying to steady herself and focus on what to do next. But the confusion only deepens as the minutes pass. It feels like an eternity since she was first approached at the counter, when everything seemed normal, when everything was fine. But now she can't help but feel as if she's been pulled into a nightmare, one she can't escape from no matter how hard she tries. Then finally, the man in the suit speaks again. "We've contacted the airline's head office, and they're looking into the issue," he says. "But we need to verify some details about your ticket first." He motions for her to sit down again, and she reluctantly complies. The woman looks at him with suspicion. What could they possibly need to verify if the ticket was real? Why hadn't they done this earlier? Why were they making her wait in this uncomfortable room without giving her any clear answers? The minutes tick by slowly as the officer leaves the room, and the woman is left alone again. Her mind is spinning as she tries to make sense of everything. What could have gone wrong? Why is she being treated like this? She had always been careful when booking her flight, and even more careful when checking in, but now it feels like nothing she did mattered. They had already made up their minds about her, and nothing she said or did would change their opinion of her. As the seconds pass, she feels a wave of helplessness wash over her. She had come to the airport with high hopes and excitement, but now all of that feels distant, like a dream she can't quite reach. She's been pushed into a corner, and she has no idea how to get out. The anxiety in her chest builds again, threatening to consume her, but she forces herself to stay calm. She has to stay strong. She has to trust that this will be resolved soon. The silence in the room is suffocating now. With every passing moment, the woman feels more and more trapped, her thoughts racing as she tries to make sense of what's happening. She knows something isn't right. She's being treated like a criminal, but she hasn't done anything wrong. She's innocent, and yet no one seems to care. The door opens, and one of the officers steps back inside. His face is impassive, and he doesn't offer any words of comfort or explanation. He simply gestures for her to stand up. She looks up at him, confused and anxious, but she rises from her seat anyway, wondering if this will finally be the moment when they clear everything up and let her go. But as she stands there, her heart sinks. The officer doesn't move toward the door. He doesn't tell her she can leave. Instead, he steps aside, and another officer enters the room behind him. This one is a woman, and she carries herself with a sense of authority that makes the woman's stomach twist. She feels the air grow thicker with tension. The woman in front of her doesn't smile or offer any kind of reassurance. Her face is stern, her eyes cold. As she looks at the woman, she doesn't ask how she's feeling or try to calm her nerves. Instead, she simply lays down the facts. "You're being detained while we investigate this matter further," she says, her voice flat and emotionless. The woman's mind begins to spin again. Detained further? How much longer will this go on? Why can't they just admit it's a mistake and let her go? She hasn't done anything wrong, yet they are treating her like she's some kind of criminal. She opens her mouth to protest, but the words don't come out right away. She's too stunned by the coldness of the officer's tone to respond with any real conviction. But she knows she can't stay quiet this time. She can't let them walk all over her. This is her trip. She paid for it. She deserves to be treated with respect. She finally manages to say, "I don't understand why this is happening. This is a mistake. I've done nothing wrong. My ticket is real." The woman's gaze doesn't soften. She looks at her with an almost clinical detachment, as if this were all just another part of her job, something she does every day. And the woman is just another case to deal with. It doesn't matter that she's upset, doesn't matter that she's confused. All that matters is the investigation. And whatever they need to do to get to the bottom of this, the officer steps back slightly and motions for her to sit again, her posture rigid and unyielding. She feels her body tense up as she sits back down, her mind still swirling with frustration. She's so tired of this waiting game, tired of feeling helpless, tired of being made to feel like a criminal when she's done nothing wrong. But the officers don't seem to care. They've already made their assumptions, and no amount of pleading or explaining will change that. They keep looking at her like she's a problem to be solved, a puzzle to figure out. But no matter how hard they try, they'll never understand the panic and confusion building inside her. Minutes pass like hours, and the woman's thoughts are a blur of frustration and disbelief. She's started to lose track of time. It's hard to tell how long she's been sitting in this cold, sterile room. All she knows is that every moment she spends here feels like a small eternity, as if each second drags on and adds to the weight of her anxiety. She looks at the clock on the wall, but it doesn't help. It just reminds her that time is slipping away, and she's still no closer to figuring out what's going on or how to fix it. Then, just as she's about to lose all hope, the door opens again, and this time it's the man in the suit who enters. He's followed by another officer, and the two of them look serious as they approach her. She looks at them, desperately hoping that this will finally be the moment when everything is explained, but instead the man in the suit just gives her a curt nod before sitting down across from her. "We've reviewed the situation," he says in a tone that suggests there's been some kind of breakthrough, but his expression is still hard to read. It's clear that they haven't reached any real solution yet, and the woman feels a sinking feeling in her chest. She's not sure if she's relieved or even more worried than before, but she knows one thing for sure: this isn't over yet. The man in the suit looks at her with those cold eyes, but now there's something different in his gaze, a hint of uncertainty, like he's unsure how to proceed next. He shifts in his seat and glances at the officer standing behind him before returning his attention to her. For a moment, the woman feels a flicker of hope. Maybe they're finally going to admit the mistake. Maybe they'll realize she's been telling the truth all along. But then he speaks again, and the hope fades just a little more. "We've confirmed the ticket is valid," he says, "but there's still an issue that needs to be addressed." His words are deliberate, but they only confuse her more. An issue with the ticket, but she just heard them say it was valid. If it was valid, why are they still holding her here? Why hasn't she been released yet? What more could they possibly need from her? She feels the frustration building again, but she holds it in. She's already been through so much, and she can't afford to lose her temper now. She opens her mouth to respond, but before she can speak, the officer standing next to him cuts her off. "We've had to contact the head office for further verification," the officer says, his voice clipped and businesslike, as if he's dealing with something routine, something that doesn't concern her at all. The woman feels the anger rise in her chest, but she tries to keep it in check. It's a mistake. They don't need to contact anyone. They already have all the information they need. It's all right there in front of them. She grips the arms of the chair and takes a deep breath, but it doesn't help. The panic keeps swirling inside her, thoughts racing with questions. She doesn't know how to answer. What's going to happen to her? Why is this taking so long? What's the real reason they're treating her like this? She looks at the man in the suit, hoping for some kind of answer, but all he does is look back at her with that same unreadable expression, his eyes cold as ever. She can't help but wonder if they even care about her side of the story at all. The minutes stretch into what feels like hours as she sits there, feeling more isolated with each passing second. She watches as the officer in charge continues to type something into his tablet, his fingers tapping quickly across the screen like he's working through a routine task, while she's stuck in this room with no clear explanation of why she's still here. They haven't told her if she can go yet or what's going to happen to her next, and the uncertainty is driving her mad. As the silence drags on, the woman begins to feel the weight of the situation more and more. It's like she's sinking deeper into the floor with each breath she takes. She never imagined that a simple trip could turn into something like this. Her dream vacation had turned into a nightmare, and now she doesn't even know if she'll ever make it to the plane at all. She hadn't done anything wrong, but they were treating her like she was guilty of something she couldn't even comprehend. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the man in the suit speaks again. "We've managed to get a hold of the appropriate people," he says, but the woman notices a slight hesitation in his voice, as if he's not sure how to continue. He looks at her for a long moment before saying the situation has been escalated, and will need to take further action at this point. The words don't even register in her mind. All she can focus on is the cold weight of the officer's gaze, and the uncertainty that still surrounds her. She can't escape the feeling that they're trying to trap her in a situation she didn't create, but she has no idea how to fight back. The officer standing behind the man takes a step forward and glances at the woman with a look that almost seems like pity, but it doesn't make her feel better. She's not here to be pitied, she's here to be treated fairly, and she's still waiting for an explanation of why she's being held when all she wants to do is board her flight and leave all of this behind. But that doesn't seem like it's going to happen anytime soon. Time seems to stretch endlessly as the minutes crawl by, and the room feels even colder now. The woman looks down at her hands, her fingers trembling. As she clutches the edges of the seat, she tries to steady her breathing, but it's getting harder with every passing second. The anxiety is overwhelming, and she's beginning to wonder if she'll ever get out of this room at all, if she'll ever be free of the nightmare they've pulled her into. The door opens once more, and this time it's not just the man in the suit or the officers. It's a new figure, someone with a more authoritative presence, who steps into the room. He's tall and well-dressed in a uniform that instantly demands respect. The woman can feel the change in the air. As he enters, his eyes scan the room briefly before settling on her, and for the first time in what feels like hours, someone looks at her with something other than cold suspicion. The man speaks, his voice firm, but not unkind. "I'm the airport supervisor," he says, "and I've been briefed on the situation." She looks up at him, her heart skips a beat as she wonders if this is the person who can finally put an end to all of this, if he's the one who will finally see her side of things. But the supervisor doesn't immediately offer any comfort. Instead, he turns to the man in the suit and asks to see the ticket again. The man hands it over without a word, and the supervisor examines it closely before turning back to her. "So you're saying you didn't purchase this ticket from any unauthorized source?" He asks, his tone more inquisitive, now less accusatory. She nods quickly. "Yes, I bought it directly through the airline's website," she says. "I've never had a problem before. I don't know why this is happening." The supervisor listens intently, but there's a flicker of doubt in his eyes as he looks at the ticket again and taps it against the table gently. "It's strange," he says. "It doesn't make sense for something like this to happen, but the system has flagged it as a possible counterfeit." He looks up at her as if to gauge her reaction, and she feels a flash of frustration. Well, of course, it doesn't make sense, she thinks to herself. Why would it? She's telling the truth, but every word she says is being doubted. Every gesture she makes seems to be scrutinized, like she's hiding something when all she's doing is trying to get her vacation back. "I've been waiting here for so long," she says finally, the words spilling out. "I just want to know what's happening. I want to get on my flight. I don't care about anything else at this point. I don't deserve to be treated like this. I've done nothing wrong." The supervisor raises a hand to silence her, and for a moment she thinks he's going to dismiss her just like the others. But instead he speaks in a calmer tone. "I understand your frustration," he says. "I truly do. But there are protocols in place that we have to follow. We are working to resolve this, and I assure you we'll get to the bottom of it." She stares at him for a moment, her mind still racing, but something about his tone makes her hesitate. Just for a second she wonders if he's telling the truth, or if he's just another person trying to buy time to cover up their mistake. She wants to believe him, but after everything that's happened, it's hard to trust anyone in this room. She nods reluctantly, not knowing what else to say. Her throat feels tight with emotion, and she can barely keep the tears from welling up in her eyes. She doesn't want to cry, not in front of them, but the humiliation of it all is almost too much to bear. The supervisor stands up and gestures for the officers to leave the room as he walks toward the door. "I'll be back shortly," he says. "We're contacting the airline's technical team to verify the issue. In the meantime, please stay here." She nods again, her body feeling heavy as she slumps back into the chair alone. Once more the silence returns to the room, and she watches as the door clicks shut behind him, leaving her in the dim light of the small room where time seems to move differently. Every second feels like an eternity, and she feels as though she's lost all sense of control. She looks around the room, her mind still buzzing, but she can't make sense of any of it. Why has everything gone wrong? Why is she being treated this way? After all she did was buy a ticket, the anxiety is suffocating now. It presses down on her chest. Like a weight she can't lift, no matter how hard she tries to breathe. The feeling of dread stays with her. Her palms are sweaty, and she can feel the tears starting to burn at the back of her eyes. She wipes them away, quickly, not wanting to give in, but the exhaustion is overwhelming. She closes her eyes for a moment, trying to gather herself, but it doesn't help. The room feels like it's closing in on her. The walls seem to be getting smaller, the air thicker, and with each passing minute her hope fades just a little more. She can't understand why they're doing this to her. She's not a criminal. She's not someone who deserves to be treated like this. She just wants to get on a plane and go on her vacation. But all of it is slipping further and further away, the reality of it all crashing down around her. The silence stretches on like a thick fog, surrounding her every thought and feeling. She can't escape it. The tension in the room is unbearable, and with every passing minute she feels more alone, more disconnected from the world outside her. The flight she had been so excited for feels like a distant memory, now something out of reach, like a dream fading with the morning light. She looks at the clock again and wonders how much longer she'll have to sit here. Her body feels heavy, as though the weight of the situation is pressing down on her shoulders. She closes her eyes briefly, trying to steady her racing thoughts, but it's hard to block out the nagging anxiety that has taken root inside her mind. Everything feels wrong. The situation is spiraling further and further out of control, and she has no idea how to stop it. It feels like the world is moving on without her, leaving her behind in a place where nothing makes sense, where she's stuck in a moment she can't escape from. The door opens suddenly, and she jumps in her seat, startled, but it's just the supervisor again, his expression still serious, but his eyes carry a flicker of something softer this time, a hint of empathy, maybe, or maybe she's just imagining it after everything that's happened. It's hard to trust anything she sees or hears at this point. She watches him as he steps into the room, his voice breaking through the thick silence. "I've spoken with the airline," he says. "We've confirmed that the ticket is genuine. There was an error in the system that flagged it incorrectly." She blinks in disbelief for a moment, unable to process what he's saying. Did he really just say that the ticket is real? The system flagged it by mistake. How could they have let this go on for so long? How could they have held her here and treated her like this over an error that wasn't even her fault? She feels a wave of anger wash over her, but it's mixed with a strange sense of relief as well. At least now she knows it wasn't her who was wrong. It wasn't her who caused this mess. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," he continues, his voice still steady and professional, but there's something different in it now. The tone has softened just slightly, as though he genuinely regrets the way things have unfolded. "We're going to ensure this doesn't happen again," he adds, "and we'll arrange for you to be escorted to your gate immediately." Her mind is spinning with 1,000 thoughts. All at once, the shock of the revelation, the frustration of everything. She's endured the exhaustion from the emotional roller coaster. She's been on all of it, crashing over her like a tidal wave. She stands up slowly, as though she's still unsure if it's real, if this is really happening, or if it's just another part of the nightmare she's been living for the past several hours. She doesn't know what to feel anymore. The anger is still there, but it's tempered by a deep sense of relief. She wants to say something, anything, to express just how much she's been hurt by the whole ordeal, but all she can do is nod numbly, her mouth dry and her thoughts scattered. She just wants to leave. She wants to get to her gate and put this entire experience behind her as quickly as possible. The supervisor motions for the officers to step forward, and one of them approaches her with a gentle but firm hand on her arm. "We're taking you to your gate now," he says. "We'll make sure you board your flight without further issues." She nods again, not trusting herself to speak. Her mind is still reeling from the revelation that it was all a mistake, a simple error that led to everything she's been through. She wants to ask more questions, but she doesn't know where to begin. She's too tired, too emotionally drained to think straight anymore. As she's escorted down the hall towards the gate, she notices that the airport seems almost normal again, people walking past with their bags and their phones. They don't know what she's just been through. They don't know the torment she's been enduring. And maybe that's for the best. She doesn't want to be the center of attention anymore. She just wants to disappear into the crowd and forget all of this ever happened. When they finally reach her gate, the officer steps aside and gives her a brief nod, as if signaling the end of this ordeal. She looks around at the people seated nearby. No one pays her any attention. They're all too focused on their own lives to notice the quiet storm that has just passed through her own. She feels a momentary sense of relief, but it's short-lived, because as soon as she sits down in her seat, a wave of exhaustion crashes over her. Her eyes flutter closed, and for the first time in what feels like days, she allows herself to breathe deeply. But as she sits there, the weight of the entire situation still hangs over her like a cloud she can't shake. She is on her way to her destination, but the journey has been nothing like she expected, nothing at all like the smooth, easy trip she had envisioned when she first booked her ticket. She knows that things might eventually return to normal, but she also knows that she'll never forget this moment, never forget the fear and uncertainty she felt as she was treated like a criminal when all she wanted was to board a flight and go on her vacation. The finality of it settles in like an uninvited guest in her mind. She just hopes that the next chapter of her journey is smoother than the one she's just lived through. As she settles into her seat on the plane, she feels a strange mixture of emotions flooding through her. It's relief mixed with bitterness. The overwhelming weight of everything that has happened still lingers in her chest like a heavy stone. She's been through so much just to get here, and now that she's finally on her way, she doesn't know how to feel about it. All the turbulence of the past few hours has left her shaken and exhausted, but there's a quiet sense of gratitude too, that she's finally moving forward. She just wants to reach her destination. She wants to leave this chapter behind and start anew, but she knows the scars of this experience will stay with her for a long time. The plane begins to taxi down the runway, and she feels the familiar sensation of takeoff, her body lifting with the aircraft as it rises into the sky. She watches the airport shrink away through the window, and for a moment she wonders if she'll ever look at airports the same way again, if the memory of everything she's been through will always be tied to this place, to the cold, sterile walls and the questioning eyes that judged her without reason. She knows she'll never forget the way she felt in that small room, the way time seemed to stand still while she was trapped in a nightmare that wasn't of her making. As the plane climbs higher into the sky, she leans back in her seat and closes her eyes for a moment. She's too tired to think, too emotionally drained to keep processing everything, but the thoughts keep coming anyway. Memories of the officers, the supervisor, their faces, their words. It's all jumbled up inside her mind, and she can't seem to make sense of it all. She wants to push it out, but it clings to her like a shadow following her. Wherever she goes, she thinks about how differently this could have gone if they had just listened to her from the start, if they had trusted her instead of treating her like a criminal. She wonders how many others have had to go through the same thing, how many people have been wrongly accused simply because of a system error or a misunderstanding. She wants to scream out loud to demand that things be different, but she knows there's nothing she can do now. The damage has been done, the experience has left its mark on her, and there's no undoing it. All she can do now is move forward, put the pieces of herself back together, and try to heal the wounds that have been inflicted on her. Trust in the system, trust in people. It's all been shaken to its core, and she wonders if she'll ever be able to look at things the same way again. The flight attendants move up and down the aisles, offering drinks and snacks, but she declines. It's hard to stomach anything right now. Her mind is too full of everything that's happened. She doesn't want to be around people. She just wants to sit quietly and process the mess of emotions that's swirling inside her. But even as she tries to focus on the quiet hum of the plane, she can't escape the thoughts that keep invading her mind. It's like she's stuck in a loop, a never-ending cycle of frustration and disbelief. She just wants to forget. She wants to leave all of it behind. The hours stretch on, and the woman finds herself staring out of the window at the clouds below. The beauty of the sky almost feels surreal to her now, like something she's not quite able to appreciate after everything she's been through. It's hard to feel at peace when so much of her world has been turned upside down. She's had a taste of what it feels like to be treated unfairly, to be misunderstood, and to be trapped in a situation she couldn't control, and it has left her feeling vulnerable and exposed, like a part of her has been taken away. Eventually, the plane begins its descent, and she feels the familiar pull of gravity. As they approach their destination, her thoughts are still swirling, but there's a small sense of anticipation now, too. She's almost there, almost free of the nightmare that has haunted her since she arrived at the airport. She wants to step off the plane and feel the solid ground beneath her feet. But even then, she knows that the journey isn't over, not completely. She'll still have to deal with the aftermath of everything that happened. She'll have to reconcile with the anger and the hurt, the disbelief that the system failed her and left her feeling powerless in a situation that should never have escalated so far. As the plane touches down, she exhales a breath she didn't even realize she was holding, her heart racing with a mixture of emotions. It's finally over. But it's not over. She knows the scars of this experience will follow her for some time, and she wonders how long it will take for her to truly feel like herself again, when she can leave all of this behind and just move on, when she can look back and remember that day as nothing more than a memory, a moment in time. She won't let it define her, but she knows it will take time for that to happen, time to heal the wounds that still sting too sharply for her to ignore. As she stands to leave the plane, she feels a sense of resolve settle within her. She may have been wronged, but she's not broken. She'll move forward even if the path ahead is uncertain. Even if it's filled with obstacles, she'll keep moving forward, no matter what, because she knows she's stronger than the circumstances that tried to tear her down.